tender is the night. Mr. McKisko drew a long breath, flung himself into the shallows, and began a stiff-armed battling of the Mediterranean, obviously intended to suggest a crawl. His breath exhausted, he arose and looked around with an expression of surprise that he was still in sight of shore. "I haven't learned to breathe yet. I never quite understood how they breathed." He looked at Rosemary inquiringly. "I think you breathe out underwater," she explained. "And every fourth beat, you roll your head over for air." "The breathing's the hardest part for me. Shall we go to the raft?" The man with the leonine head lay stretched out upon the raft, which tipped back and forth with the motion of the water. As Mrs. McKisko reached for it, a sudden tilt struck her arm up roughly, whereupon the man started up and pulled her on board. "I was afraid it hit you." His voice was slow and shy. He had one of the saddest faces Rosemary had ever seen. The high cheekbones of an Indian, a long upper lip, and enormous, deep-set, dark golden eyes. He had spoken out of the side of his mouth, as if he hoped his words would reach Mrs. McKisko by a circuitous and unobtrusive route. In a minute he had shoved off into the water, and his long body lay motionless toward shore. Rosemary and Mrs. McKisko watched him. When he had exhausted his momentum, he abruptly bent double, his thin thighs rose above the surface, and he disappeared totally, leaving scarcely a fleck of foam behind. "He's a good swimmer." Mrs. McKisko's answer came with surprising violence. "Well, he's a rotten musician.